Hey everyone, I'm going to show you how to do a blanket or a scarf, whatever you want really, beginning to end on the Gallery London Serenity Knitting Loom. Now what you want to do is, first of all, you need to decide what you're making, whether you want to do a washcloth, a scarf, a baby blanket, a blanket for an adult bed, just whatever you want to make. And I do suggest doing a little swatch first, which I have done, and what I'm going to teach you today is the garter stitch, which the reason I'm using this stitch, it's wonderful for blankets, it has a very nice texture to it, and it's completely reversible and there is no curl to it at all. It lays perfectly flat. So I'm a big fan of this stitch. The yarn I am using is a skein of Caron Jumbo. It is a 4-ply 12-ounce roll with 340 grams, a 12-ounce roll. One thing I love about this loom is the fact that I can use 4-ply yarn, or worsted weight is another common term that is 4-ply yarn. You only need to use one strand of it. With most of the looms, you either have to use special stitches or you'll have to run 2 strands together as one to create a nice thick project. But with this, you don't. And I also like using the large 1-pound spools of yarn because then there's less adding new yarn. Alright, now I'm going to talk about swatching real quick, which I did the cast on and the stitch I want to use for my blanket, and I've done a swatch. You don't want your swatch to be just like a couple inches. You want to do it to where it's at least 4 or 5 inches down. That way it's going to stretch down to however wide it's going to be. Now this one, once you have it, you take your tape measure or ruler or whatever, and you want to measure how wide it is. This one is almost 2.5 inches wide. So I'm going to use 2.5 inches as my measurement. Let me get my phone out here. Now I do believe there is 296 pegs on this loom. I counted them very quickly, so I might be off by a few. We use 10 pegs for our swatch, so we're going to divide the number of pegs on the loom by how many pegs we used for our swatch, which breaks it down to 29.6 10 peg spots that we can do. Now each one is, we'll just go ahead and say 2.5 inches wide. So we're going to times that 29.6 by 2.5. That gives us 74 inches. So at the way I knit, the max width of the blanket I could do on this blanket would be 74 inches wide, which if you divide it by 12, that's 6.17 inches, 6.17 feet wide. So now that I know that, you can use those measurements to make the blanket however wide you want. You know that every 10 inches or 10 pegs gives you something that is 2.5 inches wide. Once you have figured out how wide you want to make your project and how many pegs you need to use, let's go ahead and get our cast on going. And the cast on I'm going to be using is a crochet chain cast on. I am a big fan of this cast on. It has a very nice finished look to it. And you can do it using a crochet hook, but I've actually found a way to use it without using a crochet hook. First you want to start with a slip knot. This string right here, the end, you're going to completely ignore that and just weave that in when you're done. So pull out a little length of yarn. Your working yarn you put behind a peg and you pull that yarn through that loop you had made and you tighten it. You don't want to make it too tight. Just pull that out of the way. But see, that still gives you've got a loop hooked on there, and you got your loop here. So you take it and wrap it behind the peg and pull the working yarn through. And you do this for however many pegs you want to use, which I'm just going to cast on just a few to give you an idea of how to do this. So you just keep doing that until you get it as wide as you want. Now once it is however wide you want it to be, all you do is, let me zoom this in a little bit. All you do is you take that loop, put it on the next peg, and tighten it. A quick tip, I'm going to take and pull this down. If you decide to do a blanket as wide as you possibly can, which would be following this loop, which is going to go all the way around, it's going to loop around here, it'll actually bring you back to this first peg. I suggest leaving at least one peg empty, if not two, because if you go all the way to this peg, if you're just knitting and you're just going and going and going and you're not paying attention to what you are doing, it is very, very easy to connect both of these, and then that's a lot harder to fix later down the road. It can be done, it's a pain. So these pegs are removable. You can just take a peg out, or if you want to use that peg, I suggest marking it somehow. Now you will notice there are pegs on this loom that I have marked. I have marked them for different stitches, which the playlist for all the videos I've done for this loom is in the description, and those videos will explain more about the skipped pegs. Okay, so you've got your cast on. To get this effect, we have to use two different stitches. The first stitch we will use is our E-wrap, or sometimes referred to as the knit stitch. You'll put your working yarn behind the peg and wrap. You will notice I didn't wrap this peg, because if you look, the yarn's kind of coming from in between both of these pegs. You will see some people wrap this peg, you will see some people skip it. Both ways are correct. Now if you're doing a flat panel of just one stitch, it will want to curl. So if you're just using your purl stitch, or you're just using your E-wrap or your knit stitch or your flat stitch, any single stitch, it will want to curl from every direction. Skipping this first peg does help to help it to lay flatter. So that's something I've just kind of incorporated in pretty much anything I make, just because of habit. So we are wrapping it around the back. And we're going to the next one, wrapping it around the back, wrap it around the back, wrap it around the back, wrap it around the back. There you go. Now there is no anchor peg, so what I do is at that last one, I just hold it, pull that bottom loop over, and it's there. That's not going to go anywhere. Now how you hold your hook is up to you. Some people like to put the hook down through the top and pull it over. I am personally more comfortable with putting it up through the bottom and pulling it over. Again, that is up to you. You do whatever you're most comfortable with, because especially if you're making a blanket, this is going to be a very long process. So you want to make sure you're doing everything the way that is most comfortable for you to do. Okay. First, our cast on and our first row of E-wrap is done. Our second row is going to be the purl stitch. Now watch, purl stitch, you're going to put your hook down through the loop on the peg, which again I'm skipping the first peg of that row. Pull the yarn underneath. Take your hook and pull that up through the bottom. You've now got a new loop. You're going to take the old loop off, put that new loop on, and tighten it. Don't make it too tight, or else you won't be able to take it off on your next round. So we're going to do the same for the next. Old loop off, new loop on, yarn under, up, old loop off, new loop on. You will do this until you're at the very end of your row, and that is the purl stitch. Now you will just continue switching back and forth between the two, between the E-wrap and the purl stitch, and that will create your garter stitch. Now at some point, if you're making a large item, you may come to the end of your yarn and you may need to add new yarn. So what we do at this point is, let's say you just naturally came to the end. You want to work this in, but you also want to work in your new yarn as well. I'm not a fan of tying knots. Some people are. I'm not a fan of tying knots. It's not wrong, it's just my personal preference. So you want to pull this to where there's a couple inches past where the yarn is coming off the peg. And you're going to hold both of these, actually I'll do about 4 inches past. You're going to hold both of these strands together. You're going to treat them as one and you're going to use them as one. So I'm on my purl row. As you can see, I'm using both of those as one. Which the first one's always the hardest because you don't have any tension on this end. So you take that off and you might want to put your finger on the end of the peg when you put the new loops on, just so they tighten up correctly. And then you can take this in and tighten it up some too, so that your stitches are even. Okay, we're going to go to our next. We got 2 strands together. We're just going to knit. Oops. We're just going to do this like normal. And we're going to do one more. You want to do at least 3 stitches with both of the strands together, because that will help to lock that in and this isn't going to come undone. Now what I do is I just take those extra ends, pull them down through so they are out of the way, and just continue with what you're doing to the end of your row. Now that process is the same even on your E-wrap row. You would do the same. You just run it together for at least 3 pegs or 3 stitches, however you want to phrase that. Drop the second strand and then go to the end. When you get to your next row, you're going to notice that some of the pegs will have 2 strands on them together instead of 1. That's fine. Just knit them like normal. And then when you are done, I will show you how to weave your ends in. Okay. Actually, I'm going to cut that because that's all I got to show you for that part. At this point, you will make your item until it is the length that you want, until it is completely done. Now with blankets and stuff, I will knit until, typically if I'm doing a full-size blanket, I will knit until I can stand up and it is touching the ground, and I hold the loom just flat like this, and that's kind of how I measure how long I want it to be. Now it will stretch out, so when you get it to where you think it's as long as you want it to be, do like an extra 5 or 6 inches, just so, because it will kind of stretch and shape some. That way you won't take it off the loom and wish that you'd made it just a little bit longer. To do your cast off, I'm again doing a crocheted cast off without using a crocheted hook. Now for this, at your cast off, you will start with your very last peg. And what I'm going to do is you take, just like you were doing with your purl stitch, you pull that loop up through the bottom, but we are going to chain 1. So you're going to chain, do 1 little chain in between, take your hook, and pull it up, which I had cut the yarn before I'd done this just because I needed to use the yarn to show you how to do the swatch on the other side. But do not cut the yarn. Just work the yarn, and then when you're done you can cut. Alright, I did a chain. You pull it up through the next peg, which I pulled some of the other strand. There we go. You pull the yarn up through each peg, and then you chain 1, which is pulling your working yarn through and creating a new loop. You do this with every peg, which I will work it down to the end with you. There are a ton of different cast on techniques and cast off techniques that you can do. I do have special playlists just for cast on, just for cast off. If you see a video and it's done using a different loom, that is fine. The technique is still the same. Alright, we're pulling it through. We're getting there. We just got a couple. Got 4 left. Almost. Down to the last 2. Oops. Pull that working yarn through. Okay, we are at our last one. And instead of chaining, doing a new loop, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut my yarn, pull that whole tail through, and tighten it. And at this point, you got to make sure you do not skip any pegs, or else you will have a huge mess. So pay a lot of attention when you're doing this. But there we go. There is our cast off. You just take everything off the loom. Your blanket or scarf or whatever, you want to stretch it out so you can kind of see what it looks like. But here's a close-up, if my autofocus will work, of how that cast off looks. See, it blends in, and the cast on and cast off have about the same amount of stretch to it. The cast off might have a little bit more, but that's fine. So your blanket will lay nice and flat, and it'll be shaped very nice. Now with these ends, you want to weave them in. Just pull that to where it's shaped right. Now what I do is, first of all, I'm going to need a smaller crochet hook. That one's a little too, there we go, this one should work. Pull a smaller one because I don't want to put big huge hooks through the stitches. You just find stitches and pull the yarn through. You do the same when you're weaving in ends that you have added new string, because if you do a blanket, you're going to have to add new string. And what I do is I'll just go over a couple, go down a couple. You just kind of weave this through some. There really is not a wrong way to do this, because as long as you've got the cast off, that's already knotted when we did this last stitch, so that's not going to come undone. This is just hiding these ends. Okay, let's go over to our cast on, which we'll just pull it through this one. We're going to go over a few. Just to get it out of the way. Now, one thing I do suggest, don't just cut that right there. Take and stretch your item every way you can think of so that it will loosen that up. And then I still cut it with just a little tiny bit sticking out, because that will kind of work itself in, and then it's really not going to be noticeable. Okay, there you go. That is everything you need to make a blanket on the Gallery London S-Loom beginning to end. Now, I do have a really exciting note to tell you about this loom. Alright, now, for a chance to win your very own Gallery London Serenity Loom, you gotta visit www.thegallerylondon.org. The website is in the description below, and you got to sign up for their newsletter. A winner will be published every week on the website, so you're going to want to make sure you check that. Again, for a chance to win your very own Gallery London loom, which is an awesome loom. You're going to get your extra pegs with it and everything. You got to go to www.thegallerylondon.org and sign up for their newsletter. Okay, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below.